She was 7 months pregnant when she stopped her wagon for two strangers. Everyone else would have left to die in the heat. Daisy Foster had already lost her husband, was drowning in debt, and had just days before the bank took her farm. She had no money, no help, and no reason to believe life could still surprise her. But on that lonely Nebraska road, under a punishing white sun, she found an elderly couple sitting in the dust with one small bag and nowhere to go. She thought she was rescuing the abandoned. She had no idea she was bringing home a secret that would expose stolen land, a cruel betrayal, and a fortune no one saw coming. And by the time the truth came out, the widow people thought was finished would become the reason dozens of broken lives found a home. Pregnant, broke, widowed. And on that Thursday afternoon, Daisy Foster was one bad decision away from losing everything. The Nebraska heat pressed down like a hand on the back of her neck. Dust lifted in red clouds beneath Cinnamon's tired hooves. The wagon wheels complained with every turn. Her lower back throbbed. Her swollen ankles burned. And inside her, 7 months along, her baby kicked as if it already knew this world would not be gentle. Daisy tightened her grip on the reins and stared down the long dirt road to Willow Creek. She only needed flour, salt, maybe lamp oil if the prices hadn't climbed again. That was the plan. Simple. Survive one more day. Count one more penny. Ignore the fear clawing at her ribs every time she thought about the banknote folded in the kitchen drawer. 15 days. That was how long she had before the bank came for Grant's land. The wind hissed through the prairie grass, dry and restless. It carried the smell of hot earth, horse sweat, and sun-baked wood. The same wind that used to make Grant laugh when he stood in the doorway with dirt on his boots and seed in his hands. The same wind that now moved through the empty spaces he had left behind. 5 days. That was all the fever had taken. 5 days from strong enough to plow at dawn to buried under a wooden cross in hard soil. Daisy still hadn't caught up to the silence. She shifted on the wagon bench and winced. The boards were hard. Her belly felt heavy as stone. She told herself not to cry. Not here. Not again. Then she saw them. At first, they looked like a pile of discarded sacks under a scraggly patch of brush near the bend in the road. Something pale, something still. But as Cinnamon drew closer, the shape changed. People. An old man. An old woman, one small cloth sack between them. They weren't talking, they weren't waving, they were just sitting there in the narrow strip of shade, as if motion had become too expensive. Daisy pulled the reins. Cinnamon stopped with a snort. The wagon creaked, the heat buzzed. Somewhere in the dry grass, cicadas screamed. Daisy squinted at them. The old man's hat was frayed nearly white at the brim. His shoulders curved inward like a fence post weathered by too many storms. The woman beside him held his arm with both hands, her fingers thin and trembling. Her dress was faded the color of dust. Her shoes looked wrong for walking, too soft, too worn. The cloth sack at their feet was barely full. Not travelers, Daisy thought. Cast-offs. Are you folks all right? She called. The woman slowly lifted her face. Her eyes were dark and tired in a way Daisy recognized instantly. Not sleepy tired. Soul tired. We're resting, dear, the woman said. The old man didn't speak right away. He looked at Daisy with the blank caution of someone who had learned that every question comes with a price. Daisy glanced up and down the road. No town in sight, no farmhouse. No shade beyond the oak half a mile back. The sun sat high and vicious overhead. Heat shimmered over the ground. Where are you headed? Daisy asked. This time the old man answered. His voice was rough and low, like it had to climb over stones to get out. Nowhere in particular. The words landed heavier than they should have. Daisy looked at the woman's swollen feet, at the man's shaking hands, at her own belly, at the road. And in that moment, something in her made the choice before her mind could argue. She set the brake, climbed down slowly, opened the wagon tailgate. Get in, she said. The old man blinked. Ma'am, you don't need. Get in, Daisy repeated, before this heat kills you. The woman looked at her husband. He looked at the wagon. Neither moved. Daisy's voice sharpened. "I said get in." They obeyed. The old man climbed first, stiff and careful. The woman after him, with a quiet gasp as she lifted herself. Daisy caught her elbow. The woman's skin felt paper-thin and fever-warm. Back on the bench, Daisy flicked the reins, and Cinnamon started forward again. The wagon rolled. The wheels squealed. The three of them sat in the heat with the silence bouncing around like loose nails. Finally, Daisy asked, "Names?" "Elias," said the old man. "Pearl," said the woman. Daisy nodded once. "I'm Daisy." Another long silence. Then Pearl spoke so softly Daisy almost missed it. "Our son left us this morning." The road seemed to narrow. Daisy didn't turn around. "Left you where?" "At a bus station," Pearl whispered. "With $100. Elias swallowed hard. "Said we were a burden he couldn't carry anymore." Cinnamon's harness jingled. The prairie wind kept moving. Somewhere far off, a hawk cried. But inside Daisy, something went cold. She had expected hunger, exhaustion, maybe sickness. She had not expected betrayal. Her hands tightened on the reins until the leather bit into her skin. Ahead, the crossroads appeared. Left went to town, right went home. Daisy stared at the split in the road. 15 days from losing the farm. Barely enough food for herself. A baby coming. Debt like a noose. And now 2 strangers with nowhere to go. Cinnamon reached the junction. Daisy turned right. Toward home. Toward trouble. Toward the choice that would crack open every secret still buried ahead. Because the old couple in her wagon had arrived looking like they had nothing. But before long, Daisy would learn they had lost far more than money. And someone, somewhere, had stolen something worth millions. She should have taken them to town. That's what the practical voice in Daisy's head kept saying as the wagon rolled toward her farm under the hard white sun. Town had a church. Town had people. Town had places where lost old folks could become someone else's problem. But Daisy didn't go to town. She brought them home. The farmhouse came into view just before dusk, squat and weathered under a pale sky streaked with gold. The tin roof caught the last light. The porch sagged on one side. Chickens scratched near the fence. The back door, the one Grant kept saying he'd fix properly, still hung a little crooked. It wasn't much, but it was hers, at least for 15 more days. Daisy helped Pearl down first. The old woman's shoes were coated with red dust, and when both feet hit the ground, she let out the smallest sound, almost like a prayer. Elias climbed down slower, carrying the cloth sack as if it contained the last proof that they had once belonged somewhere. Inside, the house smelled faintly of old wood, dried herbs, lamp smoke, and the potatoes Daisy had boiled that morning. Cool shade settled around them. Pearl stood just past the threshold and looked around like she had stepped into a cathedral. "It's lovely," she said. Daisy almost laughed at that. Peeling paint, scratched table, one window that stuck in wet weather, a floorboard near the stove that whined like it was grieving. Lovely was not the word she would have used. Still, hearing it made the place feel different. She fetched water from the pump. Pearl drank with both hands around the glass. Elias didn't sit until Daisy pointed to the chair near the window. Even then, he lowered himself into it carefully, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to put weight on anything that belonged to someone else. "Have you eaten?" Daisy asked. Pearl looked down. That was answer enough. Daisy moved fast. Leftover beans, boiled potatoes, the last chunk of bread. She added a pinch of salt, some dried thyme, and warmed everything over the stove. The kitchen filled with the smell of starch, smoke, and herbs. Not much, but warm. She set the bowls down. Elias and Pearl ate in silence so complete it made Daisy's chest ache. Every bite was slow, careful, respectful. Pearl blinked back tears. Elias kept his eyes on the plate until it was empty. When they finished, Pearl pressed trembling fingers to her lips. "May the Lord remember this kindness," she said. Daisy gathered the dishes before the gratitude could settle too deep. Everybody has to eat. That night, she dragged Grant's father's old mattress into the living room. Pearl pulled a blanket from the sack, faded and hand-stitched with tiny repairs in at least 6 different colors. She spread it neatly, smoothing each corner with reverence. "It's the only one we have left," Pearl said. Daisy nodded, suddenly unable to speak. Later, in her room, she lay awake beneath the thin wash of moonlight leaking through the curtains. The house made its usual sounds, tin ticking as it cooled, crickets outside, the soft groan of the porch in the wind, and new sounds, Elias snoring low and rough from the next room, Pearl coughing deep in her chest. Daisy put one hand on her belly and stared into the dark. 2 more mouths, no extra money, no plan. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something stranger, less alone. Morning came with the smell of coffee, real coffee. Daisy shot upright, heart pounding, and hurried to the kitchen. Pearl stood at the stove with the spoon in one hand and a chipped mug in the other. Fire crackled below the kettle. The room glowed amber in the early light. Outside the open window, Daisy could hear steady sweeping. Elias was on the porch with a broom. Pearl glanced over her shoulder. "I found a little coffee in the cupboard. I hope you don't mind." Daisy looked at the nearly empty jar she'd been saving for desperation. This counted, she decided. At the table they drank in silence while dawn painted the yard soft blue and gold. The coffee smelled rich and bittersweet. The first sip hit Daisy's empty stomach like warmth made liquid. By noon, Elias had repaired the chicken coop latch. By evening, he'd rehung the back door so it finally closed with a firm click instead of a slam and a curse. Pearl transformed leftovers into something that tasted like memory. Potato cakes crisped in the pan, wild greens sizzled in lard, onion and herbs softened the air until the whole kitchen smelled like comfort. Days passed, not many, but enough to change the rhythm of the house. Elias fixed things without being asked. Fence boards, a loose hinge, a wobbling chair leg. He moved slowly, but he moved with purpose. Pearl cooked, cleaned, sorted, folded, and somehow made scarcity feel less humiliating. She hummed under her breath while she worked, old church melodies so soft Daisy barely caught them. At dusk, they sat together on the porch. The sky turned bruised purple over the prairie. The wind cooled, grass whispered. The smell of dust gave way to night air and damp earth. That was when Daisy told them about Grant, about the fever, about the loan, about the bank manager coming in 15 days. "I've got $65 in a tin box," she said, staring out into the dark, "and I owe more than 800. Elias was still. Pearl reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper so worn at the creases it looked one unfolding away from breaking apart. "Our boy wrote this when he was 9, she said. "Read it." Daisy unfolded it carefully. Large childish handwriting, crooked lines, fierce sincerity. "Mom and Dad, when I grow up, I'm going to take care of you. You'll never want for anything. I'll always be with you. I promise. Signed, Caleb." The porch seemed to go quieter than silence. Pearl took the paper back, folding it with trembling care. Elias stared into the fields. "He grew up," Elias said, "and forgot." Daisy pressed a hand against her belly. Inside, her baby shifted. And for the first time, she understood that some promises don't break loudly. Some rot from the inside until the people who trusted them are left on the side of a road. But Caleb was not the only child Elias and Pearl had. And 12 days before the bank came for Daisy's farm, another one was already on his way. The truck appeared just after noon. Daisy was in the yard tossing grain to the chickens when she heard it before she saw it. The growl of an engine carrying over the flat land. Not a tractor. Not the bank manager's polished car. Something heavier. Deliberate. She straightened slowly, one hand pressed to the base of her back. A gray pickup emerged through a veil of red dust and rolled toward the gate. On the porch, Elias stopped sanding a chair rung. Pearl looked up from shelling beans into a tin bowl. The whole farm seemed to hold its breath. The truck door opened. A man stepped out, early 40s, sun-browned skin, broad shoulders, work boots, blue shirt rolled at the forearms. He closed the door and stood still for one long second, staring at the house like he was afraid it might disappear if he blinked. Then his eyes landed on the porch, on Elias, on Pearl. Every bit of color drained from his face. "Dad?" The word cracked in the middle. Pearl rose so fast the bean bowl tipped, shells scattering across the boards. Elias pushed himself up slower. Pain stiffened his knees, but something else even stiffer in his spine. The man took 2 steps forward and stopped. "Mom?" Pearl moved first, down the steps, across the yard. Faster than Daisy thought she could. When she reached him, she grabbed him with both arms and held on like she had been drowning for years. The man folded around her. Elias stood where he was, one hand braced on the porch rail, eyes locked on them. Daisy stayed still. The air smelled like dust, dry feed, and the sharp metallic scent that comes before tears. That evening, the kitchen table held 5 mugs of coffee and more tension than the room could contain. His name was Isaac, middle son, the one who had never stopped looking. The lamp burned low, turning the walls honey gold while moths tapped the screen door, and the house filled with the smell of coffee, wood smoke, and Pearl's onion soup. Isaac sat hunched over, elbows on his knees, as if the story inside him had edges. He told it in pieces. Their family ranch in Montana, Whispering Pines, had been in Elias's line for generations. Good land, springs, timber, open pasture, a main house built from stone and sweat, everything in Elias and Pearl's names. But not everything stolen is taken with a gun. Isaac said Caleb and their sister Alice got impatient. They wanted control, money, speed. So they found a corrupt lawyer, forged documents, faked power of attorney, shifted titles, sold what they could, locked down what they couldn't. One morning they showed up with a sheriff, Isaac said, voice thick with disgust. Papers in hand, said Mom and Dad no longer owned their own home. Pearl bowed her head. Elias's jaw flexed once hard. Isaac looked at Daisy then, as if asking permission to keep opening the wound in her kitchen. She gave a tiny nod. He continued. He had tried to stop it, hired help, gathered records, pushed back. But Caleb and Alice moved faster, dirtier. When Isaac wouldn't back off, someone burned down his carpentry workshop. His wife, terrified for their children, took the kids and left for her parents' place. Isaac lost money, time, family, sleep, and then Elias and Pearl vanished. I searched for 2 years, he said, eyes wet now. 2 years. The room went still except for the stove settling with soft metallic pops. Then Isaac reached into his satchel and set a thick envelope on the table. I found what I needed. Daisy looked at the stack. Legal filings, statements, notarized affidavits, copies of deeds, recordings transcribed by some office in Lincoln, a confession from the lawyer, witness accounts, dates, signatures, fraud laid out in black ink and sealed paper. The ranch is yours again, Isaac said, looking at his parents. It always was. Pearl put her hand over her mouth. Elias didn't touch the envelope. You think paper fixes this? He asked quietly. Isaac shook his head. No, but it can stop them from keeping what they stole. That night, after Pearl and Elias had gone to lie down, Daisy sat alone at the table reading under the lamp. Whispering Pines Ranch. Appraised value, over $9 million. $9 million. She looked around her kitchen. Peeling paint. Mended curtains. A crack in the corner plaster. A woman with $65 in a tin box and a foreclosure date counting down like a clock in her blood. And in her living room, on an old mattress under a patched blanket, lay 2 people who had once owned mountains. The next few days moved fast. Too fast. Lawyers came in dark cars that looked absurd beside Daisy's wagon. They carried leather cases and spoke with crisp certainty. Fraud, criminal filings, recovery actions, warrants, injunctions, words with sharp shoes. Then came the bank manager. He arrived exactly on schedule, all polished manners and a black folder clamped to his chest. But this time Daisy didn't stand alone on the porch trying not to shake. Isaac stood beside her. The bank manager's smile weakened when Isaac laid out a cashier's check covering every cent of the debt. Principal, interest, penalties, late fees, paid in full. The manager blinked, stamped, signed, and slid the deed across the desk of the bank with a face like he had swallowed something sour. Outside in the town square, Daisy sat on a bench under the cottonwoods and held the papers against her chest. The autumn air smelled of dust, wagon grease, and distant chimney smoke. Church bells rang somewhere past Main Street. People moved around her. She barely saw them. Elias sat beside her. "Are you going to sell it?" he asked. She looked at the deed, then at her hands, then at the horizon. "Maybe," she said. "Maybe not. You have a child to think of." Daisy nodded. Then Elias added, "And now you have us." She turned to him, this old man with work-ruined hands. This stranger she had lifted into her wagon. This man who had shown up with nothing and somehow become family before she noticed it happening. Daisy exhaled. But peace did not last long. Because money can recover land, it cannot erase betrayal. And the people who had stolen Whispering Pines were about to be dragged into daylight. The reckoning began in Montana. The drive north took them through changing air and changing light. Nebraska's dry heat gave way to crisp mountain wind. Pine replaced prairie. Dust gave way to the scent of cold water, cedar, and stone. Daisy sat in Isaac's truck with one hand on her belly and the other gripping the door whenever the road curved too sharply. Pearl kept a thermos in her lap. Elias stared out the window, silent for hours. Whispering Pines appeared at the end of a long gravel drive framed by weathered gates. Even neglected, it was beautiful. The ranch house stood broad and proud beneath the mountains, built of timber and stone with deep porches and tall windows now filmed with dust. Grass had grown wild around the front path. Missing shingles exposed dark wounds in the roof. One shutter hung crooked. The place looked less abandoned than insulted, as if it knew it had been loved badly by the wrong people. Pearl stepped out first and stopped in the yard. The air smelled like sap, old leaves, and distant snow. She didn't cry. Not yet. Inside, every footstep echoed. The great room was cold and dim, the furniture gone, the walls scarred where family portraits had once hung. Daisy watched Pearl move slowly across the hardwood floors, fingertips trailing over the banister, the mantel, the doorframe to the kitchen. "Our wedding photo was there," Pearl whispered, touching a pale square on the wall. Elias remained in the doorway for a long moment before entering. "There's pain in these walls," he said. Then he took another step. "But there's memory, too." The legal hearing came 3 days later in the county courthouse. A red brick building smelling of paper, old polish, wet coats, and stale coffee. Daisy wore the plain blue dress Pearl had pressed for her. Isaac sat straight back beside his parents. Elias looked carved from oak. Pearl held her rosary but never once bowed her head. Caleb came in first. He was older than Daisy expected, softer in the middle, expensive shoes, expensive watch, and eyes that refused to stay on his parents for longer than a second. Alice arrived after him, stiff and sharp-faced, perfume too sweet for the room, jaw locked tight. Temptation had a face now. Not just greed for money, greed for comfort, position, inheritance, control. The old identity that says, take what you can. Call it survival. Let someone else pay the moral cost. The evidence was crushing. Forged signatures, false filings, witness statements, financial transfers. The lawyer's recorded confession played in that courtroom like poison turned into music. Caleb's attorney tried to paint it as misunderstanding, family miscommunication, procedural confusion. Then Pearl stood to testify. Her voice shook at first, then steadied. She spoke about the morning the sheriff came. about being told to leave the house where she had buried babies, celebrated birthdays, cooked Christmas dinners, and waded through storms. She described the patch blanket in the sack, the bus station, the $100, the words Caleb used, a burden I can't carry anymore. The room changed when she said that. Daisy felt it. Everyone did. Then Elias testified. He didn't talk long. He didn't need to. He spoke like a man setting fence posts. Few words. Deep impact. You can steal land, he said. You can steal a house. But when a child steals the dignity of his own parents, he takes something he may never be able to return. No one moved. No one coughed. No one looked away. Outside, cold wind pushed against the courthouse windows. Inside, the silence pressed on every chest. By the end of the hearing, restitution orders were moving forward. Criminal penalties followed. Because of age and legal bargaining, Caleb and Alice would not serve prison time, but the judgment was devastating. Public, financial, permanent. And that was the true punishment, not bars. Exposure. When they walked out of the courthouse, the whole town already knew. People standing near the steps went quiet as Elias and Pearl emerged. Not pity, respect. A few nodded. One older rancher removed his hat. Caleb and Alice left through a side exit. Good. Let shame take the back door. That should have been the end of the hardest part. It wasn't. Because justice in public was one thing, healing in private was another. A week later, Daisy went into labor. Too early, too hard, too fast. Rain hammered the ranch roof that night. Wind clawed at the eaves. Thunder rolled between the mountains. The house smelled of storm air, wet wool, boiling water, and lavender. Pearl crushed between her hands to keep herself steady. The midwife had not yet arrived. Daisy gripped the bed frame and cried out, terror flashing hotter than pain. Pearl stayed at her side. Isaac ran for more towels. Elias, of all people, kept the fire hot and the room ready with the terrifying calm of someone who understood that panic is useless when life is deciding whether to stay. That was the chaos sequence. Water spilling, doors opening and closing, footsteps pounding, rain battering the panes, Daisy half sobbing, half praying, a lamp flickering, a kettle screaming, blood, sweat, thunder. Pearl saying, "Look at me, child, look at me," over and over until the words became rope. At the height of it, Daisy thought she might lose everything all over again. Then the baby cried, a fierce, angry sound, alive. The whole room broke with it. Daisy collapsed back, trembling, tears and sweat mixed on her face. Pearl laughed through her own sobs. Isaac covered his eyes. Elias turned away for exactly 2 seconds before stepping back to the bed. "It's a boy," the midwife said at last. Daisy looked down at the tiny red face, the clenched fists, the impossible fact of him. "Grant," she whispered. And in that storm-lit room, while thunder faded into the hills, the house that had been stolen, reclaimed, and nearly haunted by grief became something else, a beginning. 6 months later, Whispering Pines smelled like bread again. Fresh bread, pine smoke, soap, coffee, cedar polish, soil warming under spring sun. The house had changed. No more than that. It had awakened. Workers repaired the roof. New glass caught the mountain light. Floors shone. Curtains moved softly in open windows. Pearl chose warm creams, faded blues, and earth colors that made every room feel held instead of staged. Elias supervised repairs like a man reminding a building who it belonged to. Isaac rebuilt the workshop. Daisy organized everything from meals to linens to deliveries, carrying baby Gran against her chest in a sling while she moved through the house like she had always belonged there. But the biggest change wasn't the renovation, it was the purpose. They opened Whispering Pines as a home for elderly people who had nowhere safe left to go. Not a charity display, not a sad last stop. A home, a real one. The first resident arrived on a bright May morning in a pickup that coughed blue smoke at the gate. His name was Silas, 79, former ranch hand. lived out of his car after his family stopped answering his calls. He stepped out slowly with a wooden cane and one plastic bag of clothes. He looked at the porch, the flower boxes, the long dining table visible through the front window, the mountains beyond the pasture. "Is this really for me?" he asked. Daisy smiled and shifted Grant higher on her shoulder. "It is." Silas nodded once, hard, like a man trying not to let hope embarrass him. After him came Rose, a retired school teacher with perfect posture and a suitcase held together by twine. Then Arthur, 82, stooped and quiet, abandoned after his children sold his farm out from under him. Then Eve, who had lost her home in a fire and had nowhere else to land. One by one, they came. One by one, the house filled, with slippers by the door, reading glasses on side tables. Soft voices in the morning, coughs, kettles, porch laughter, the scratch of pens writing letters that might or might not be answered, the smell of yeast and cinnamon, the clink of dishes, the rhythm of people who had been discarded learning, slowly, that they were still worth serving warm food to. Elias taught furniture repair in the workshop. Pearl baked with anyone who wanted company more than recipes. Silas adopted the vegetable garden and claimed that tomatoes listened better than most people. Rose held afternoon reading circles on the porch, her voice calm as mountain shade. Arthur whittled toy animals for little Grant, who took his first steps not toward Daisy but toward Pearl, arms wide and fearless. That made everyone laugh, even Elias. Especially Elias. Isaac rebuilt his own life too. His carpentry business in town took off. On Sundays, he brought his children to the ranch, and they ran through Daisy's rose beds until someone shouted and pretended to be mad. They called Pearl Grandma. They called Elias Grandpa. No one corrected them. As for Caleb and Alice, they vanished into another state after the scandal hollowed out their standing. They paid back part of what they had taken, not enough to restore what they broke. Enough to prove they had lost. Elias never spoke their names again. One winter evening, after the first snow silvered the peaks, Daisy stepped onto the porch with a mug of hot cider. The air smelled like pine, wood smoke, and the clean edge of cold. Inside, the kitchen glowed gold with lamplight and laughter. Grant was asleep upstairs. Rose was telling a story near the fire. Silas was probably cheating at cards again. Elias came out and sat beside her. For a while they just listened to the night, wind in the trees, a distant horse shifting in the barn, the low warmth of voices drifting through the screen door. Finally Daisy said, "I keep thinking about that road in Nebraska." Elias nodded. "I was so afraid that day," she said. "I thought I was stopping to help two people who had lost everything." He looked at her. Eyes softer now than when she first met him beneath all that grief. "And what do you think now?" Daisy stared at the lights of the house reflected faintly on the snow. "I think we found each other at the exact moment none of us could survive alone." Elias smiled. Slow, proud, full. The kind of smile that takes a lifetime to earn. And that is the truth at the center of this story. Not money, not inheritance, not even justice. This, the world may call people burdens when they become inconvenient. It may measure worth by speed, productivity, beauty, or youth. It may tell the old they are in the way, and the grieving that they should move on faster, and the struggling that help is weakness. But the world is wrong, because sometimes the people left on the side of the road are carrying the very thing that will save your life. Sometimes the stranger you feed becomes the family you were starving for. Sometimes the home you nearly lose becomes shelter for dozens, and sometimes one act of mercy cracks open a future so large you could never have seen it from the dust and heat where it began. Daisy thought she was rescuing two abandoned strangers, but before the sun set on her old life, they revealed who they really were. And in the end, that wasn't even the miracle. The miracle was that a widow with a broken heart, an unborn child, and $65 in a tin box still had enough love left to stop the wagon. And because she did, No one at Whispering Pines had to walk the rest of the road alone.